My name is Marcus, and I'm 28 years old, standing outside my childhood home on what should have been the happiest day of the year. I never imagined I'd hear those words that would shatter my world forever. I had driven 12 hours from Seattle, carrying a birthday cake and carefully chosen gifts for my family, excited to surprise them after 2 years away. The anticipation had been building for weeks as I planned this reunion, but instead of warm embraces and celebration, I was met with 4 words that cut deeper than any knife. "Don't come here again, get out." The birthday boy was being thrown out of his own family home. Before I dive into this story that changed my life forever, let me know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. If this story resonates with you or you've experienced family betrayal, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. And stick around because what my family did next will shock you, but their reaction to my response will leave you speechless. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio, I always knew I was different from the rest of my family. My parents, Robert and Linda, had 3 children, but it was clear from early on that my older sister, Sarah, was the golden child. She excelled at everything she touched. Valedictorian of her high school class, full scholarship to Harvard, and now a successful lawyer at a prestigious firm in Chicago. The walls of our home were covered with her achievements, awards, and photographs from various ceremonies. Then there was my younger brother Jake, who inherited my father's natural athletic ability. He was the star quarterback in high school and received a football scholarship to Ohio State. Even though he was younger, he seemed to understand the family dynamics better than I did. He learned early to stay out of the way when discussions turned to achievements and success. And then there was me, Marcus, the middle child who struggled with everything academic. When I was 12, I was diagnosed with dyslexia, which explained why reading had always been such a challenge. While Sarah was winning debate tournaments and Jake was breaking school records, I was spending extra hours with tutors trying to keep up with basic coursework. My parents tried to hide their disappointment, but I could see it in their eyes every time report cards came home. What I lacked in academic prowess I made up for in work ethic. At 16, I started working part-time jobs to contribute to the household and build my own sense of worth. I mowed lawns in the summer, worked at a local restaurant during the school year, and spent weekends helping with construction projects. My hands became calloused, my back grew strong, and I learned the value of honest work. The physical labor taught me problem-solving skills that couldn't be found in textbooks. When a lawnmower broke down, I figured out how to fix it. When the restaurant's point-of-sale system crashed during a busy Friday night, I somehow managed to get it running again. These small victories gave me confidence that grades never could. 2 years ago, a friend from high school who had moved to Seattle told me about an opening at a tech company. They needed someone for software testing, someone who could find problems that others missed. My dyslexia, which had been such a burden in school, actually helped me see glitches and inconsistencies that others overlooked. The job didn't require a college degree, just attention to detail and persistence. I packed everything I owned into my beat-up Honda Civic and drove west. Seattle was intimidating at first, with its towering buildings and fast-paced lifestyle, but I found my niche quickly. The tech company appreciated my unique perspective, and within 6 months I was promoted to senior tester. My salary doubled, then tripled as I moved between companies, each one offering better opportunities. But success in Seattle came with a price. Family phone calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, the conversations always centered around Sarah's latest courtroom victory or Jake's coaching position at a local high school. My parents would ask politely about my job, but I could sense their lack of understanding about what I actually did. To them, testing software wasn't real work like Sarah's law practice or Jake's teaching. The distance grew not just in miles, but in connection. I sent Christmas gifts, birthday cards, and called on holidays, but the responses became increasingly perfunctory. I told myself they were just busy, that successful families like ours naturally grew apart as children built their own lives. What I didn't share with them was how well my investments were performing. During my lunch breaks, I researched emerging tech startups, using my insider knowledge of the industry to identify companies with real potential. I started small, investing a few $100s here and there, but my portfolio grew steadily. By my second year in Seattle, I was worth more than I had ever imagined possible. The idea to surprise them for my birthday came during a particularly lonely evening in my Seattle apartment. I realized I hadn't seen my family in person for over 2 years, and I missed the chaos of family dinners, even if I was often overshadowed by my siblings' achievements. I wanted to show them that I had built something meaningful in Seattle. that the middle child had finally found his place in the world. The 12-hour drive from Seattle gave me plenty of time to imagine their surprised faces when I knocked on the door. I had stopped at an expensive department store and carefully selected gifts for everyone. A designer leather purse for my mother, premium golf accessories for my father, and an elegant pearl necklace for Sarah. For Jake, I had chosen a vintage football signed by his childhood hero. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, I noticed several cars I didn't recognize parked along the street. The house was lit up more than usual, and I could hear voices and laughter coming from inside. My heart raced with excitement, thinking perhaps they were throwing me a surprise party. Maybe they remembered my birthday after all. I grabbed the gifts from my trunk and approached the front door. The same door I had walked through thousands of times as a child. But when I knocked, the response wasn't what I expected. The laughter inside stopped abruptly, and I heard hushed whispers. When my mother finally opened the door, her face went pale. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" The question caught me off guard. "It's my birthday, Mom. I wanted to surprise everyone." I held up the bag of gifts, smiling despite her strange reaction. She stood frozen in the doorway for what felt like an eternity before reluctantly stepping aside. As I entered the living room, I understood why she seemed so uncomfortable. The dining room table was set with fine china, candles were lit, and about a dozen people were seated around an elaborate dinner spread. But this wasn't a birthday party for me. "Everyone, Marcus is here," my mother announced awkwardly. The conversation stopped, and all eyes turned to me. I recognized some faces from family friends and Sarah's colleagues, but the atmosphere was celebratory in a way that had nothing to do with my arrival. My father stood up from his position at the head of the table, wine glass in hand. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, not bothering to hide his irritation at the interruption. Sarah, radiant in a navy blue dress I had never seen before, looked up from her place of honor at the table. "Marcus, what are you doing here? We're in the middle of something important." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was Sarah's celebration dinner. She had just made partner at her law firm, and the family had organized an elaborate party to commemorate her achievement. On my birthday, not only had they forgotten it was my birthday, but they had chosen this exact day to celebrate my sister's success. "I brought gifts," I said weakly, still holding the shopping bag. The words sounded pathetic even to my own ears. My mother took the bag from me with an embarrassed smile. "That's very thoughtful, dear. Why don't you sit down? I'll get you a plate." But there was no place set for me. The table was full, every chair occupied by people who belonged to this celebration that I was not part of. I stood there in my travel-wrinkled clothes, feeling completely out of place in my own family home. Sarah continued her story about the partnership meeting, describing how the senior partners had praised her dedication and brilliant legal mind. The guests hung on every word, offering congratulations and asking about her future plans. I might as well have been invisible. When there was finally a break in the conversation, I pulled out the gifts I had so carefully chosen. My mother's reaction to the designer purse was polite but distracted. My father barely glanced at the golf accessories before setting them aside. Sarah held up the pearl necklace with a forced smile. "This is lovely, Marcus, thank you." But she was already turning back to her colleagues, eager to continue discussing her career triumph. The conversation flowed around me as if I were a stranger who had wandered into the wrong house. They talked about Sarah's corner office, her increased salary, and the high-profile cases she would now be handling. Jake, who had driven down from Columbus for the celebration, regaled everyone with stories about his championship football team. Then Sarah dropped the bombshell that would change everything. "Actually, I have another announcement," she said, standing and raising her wine glass. "I've decided to buy the family house. Mom and Dad want to retire to Florida, and I think it's time this house stayed in the family." The room erupted in applause and congratulations. My parents beamed with pride as Sarah outlined her plans to renovate the kitchen and add a home office where she could work on important cases. Everyone agreed it was a perfect solution that would allow my parents to enjoy their retirement while keeping the family home in good hands. I felt a strange panic rising in my chest. "Wait," I said, louder than I intended. "What about the rest of us? What about me?" The room fell silent. Sarah turned to look at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the sisterly affection I remembered from our childhood. "What about you, Marcus?" she asked. "When have you ever contributed anything to this family? When have you ever been successful at anything?" The words hit me like physical blows. "Sarah, I know I'm serious," she continued, her voice rising. "You've been gone for 2 years. 2 years without visiting, without helping mom and dad with anything around the house, without contributing to family decisions. You show up here uninvited, interrupting my celebration, and now you want to have a say in what happens to the family house." My father nodded in agreement. "Sarah's right, son. She's the one with the stable career, the one who can afford to maintain this property. She's earned the right to make this decision." "But this is my childhood home too," I protested. You always thought what?" Sarah's voice was sharp now, cutting. "That you could just drift through life working odd jobs and still expect to be treated like an equal member of this family? That's not how the real world works, Marcus." The guests were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. But Sarah wasn't finished. She had years of resentment to unleash, and my unexpected arrival had given her the perfect opportunity. "You know what your problem is," she continued. "You've never grown up. You've never taken responsibility for anything. While I was studying law and building a career, while Jake was getting his teaching degree and coaching kids, what were you doing, playing with computers in Seattle?" Each word was chosen to wound, and they found their mark. I felt 28 years of being the overlooked middle child crushing down on me all at once. But what happened next was worse than anything she had said. "Don't come here again," Sarah said, her voice deadly calm. "Get out. This is my house now, and you're not welcome here." My parents said nothing. They sat in their chairs, wine glasses in hand, and watched as their middle child was verbally destroyed by their golden daughter. Not one person in that room stood up for me or suggested that perhaps Sarah was being too harsh. Jake looked down at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. My mother fiddled with her napkin. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. The family friends and colleagues stared at their food, pretending they hadn't witnessed this complete humiliation. I felt hands on my shoulders pushing me toward the door. Sarah was actually physically removing me from the house, and no one was stopping her. The gifts I had brought were thrown after me, landing on the front porch with a crash that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. The door slammed shut behind me, and I stood alone on the porch where I had waited for the school bus thousands of times as a child. Through the window, I could see the dinner party resuming, glasses being refilled, conversations picking up where they had left off. It was as if I had never existed. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hands shaking, unable to process what had just happened. The family I had driven 12 hours to surprise had not only forgotten my birthday but had thrown me out of the house like a stranger. The worst part wasn't the forgotten birthday or even Sarah's cruel words. It was the absolute silence from my parents, their complete failure to defend their own son. Finally, I started the engine and drove aimlessly through the streets of my hometown. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, more worn down. The pizza place where I had worked in high school was now a cell phone store. The park where we had played as children was poorly maintained, with broken swings and graffiti on the slides. I ended up at Riverside Park, the place where our family used to have picnics when we were young. The park near the old oak tree where my father had taught me to throw a football, back when he still had patience for his middle child's clumsy attempts at athletics. Sitting on the swing set that was too small for my adult frame, I tried to understand what had gone wrong. My phone buzzed with text messages, and for a moment I hoped someone from the family was reaching out to apologize. Instead, I found messages from Jake. "Dude, you shouldn't have come tonight." From my mother. "Marcus, please understand this was Sarah's special day." From my father. "Son, maybe it's better if you give us some space right now." Not one of them acknowledged it was my birthday. Not one of them suggested that Sarah had gone too far. I was the problem, the inconvenience, the family member who didn't fit into their narrative of success and achievement. I tried calling each of them, desperate to explain myself, to make them understand that I wasn't trying to ruin Sarah's celebration. But Jake sent me straight to voicemail. My mother picked up but said she couldn't talk because they had guests. My father hung up after telling me to cool off and think about what Sarah said. That night, I checked into a Hampton Inn on the outskirts of town, the same hotel where visiting relatives used to stay when they came for holidays. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now a visiting relative in my own hometown, unwelcome in the house where I had grown up. Room service brought me a sad birthday dinner of chicken fingers and fries. I ate alone, staring at the local news on the hotel TV, trying to process the complete rejection I had experienced. 28 years old, and I felt like that awkward 12-year-old again, struggling to find my place in a family that seemed to have no room for me. Unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and began scrolling through social media. That's when I discovered the extent of my exclusion from family life. There were photos from Sarah's engagement party 6 months ago, a gathering I had never been told about. Pictures from my parents' 35th wedding anniversary celebration, which I had missed because no one had mentioned it. Jake's birthday party from last month, where the whole family had gathered except for me. They hadn't just forgotten to invite me to recent events. They had deliberately excluded me from family milestones while maintaining the pretense that we were still close when we talked on the phone. "We should get together soon, and you should visit when you can," had been lies designed to make me feel like I was still part of the family when clearly I wasn't. The realization was devastating, but it also sparked something else. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that fades quickly, but the cold, calculating kind that drives real change. If my family wanted to treat me like an outsider, then perhaps it was time to show them what this outsider had accomplished. I opened my investment portfolio on my phone, something I checked daily but had never shared with my family. The numbers were staggering, even to me. My tech startup investments had performed beyond my wildest expectations. 3 companies I had invested in early had gone public in the past year, multiplying my initial investments by factors of 10 or more. According to my portfolio summary, I was worth just over $2 million, more than Sarah made in 3 years as a partner, more than my parents had saved for retirement, more than Jake would make in a decade of teaching and coaching, and suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do with that money. The next morning, I called Maria Santos, the real estate agent whose name I had seen on signs throughout the neighborhood during my drive the night before. I explained that I was interested in making a cash purchase and needed to move quickly. When I told her my budget, her entire demeanor changed. "Mr. Johnson, with that kind of budget, you could buy the finest home in the area. Are you looking for something specific?" I was. There was a Victorian mansion on Elm Street, just 4 blocks from my childhood home, that had been for sale for months. It was the most expensive property in the neighborhood. A beautifully restored historical home with original hardwood floors, stained glass windows, and a wraparound porch. The asking price was $800,000. More than twice what my parents' house was worth. "I want to see that house today," I told Maria. "And if it's as beautiful as it looks online, I want to make a full cash offer." 3 hours later, I was walking through rooms with 12-foot ceilings, admiring the original crown molding and built-in bookcases. The master bedroom had a fireplace and a balcony overlooking a garden that would make my mother's flower beds look like weeds. The kitchen had been updated with top-of-the-line appliances while maintaining the home's historical character. "The sellers are motivated," Maria explained. "They've already relocated for work and need to close quickly. A cash offer would be very attractive to them." I made the offer that afternoon, $750,000 cash, with a closing date in 2 weeks. The sellers accepted within hours. By evening, I had signed a purchase agreement for the most prestigious home in the neighborhood where I had grown up feeling like a disappointment. But buying the house was just the beginning. I contacted a moving company in Seattle and arranged for my belongings to be shipped to Ohio. Then I went shopping. Not at the discount stores where my family had always shopped, but at the luxury retailers in Columbus. I bought furniture that would complement the Victorians' elegance, art for the walls, and everything needed to turn the house into a showpiece. I also made some strategic calls to former colleagues in Seattle. Within 2 days, I had established Johnson Technology Consulting, with plans to work remotely for West Coast clients while building a business presence in Ohio. The tech industry's shift to remote work during recent years made this easier than it would have been even 5 years ago. The real genius of my plan wasn't just buying an expensive house, it was the timing and location. Elm Street was the main thoroughfare through our neighborhood. Everyone who drove to the grocery store, the post office, or anywhere else would pass right by my new home. There would be no way for my family to avoid seeing what their cast-off middle child had accomplished. I spent the next week in Columbus working with an interior designer to furnish the house. We chose pieces that would be visible from the street, elegant furniture for the front living room, beautiful lighting that would glow warmly in the evening, and landscaping that would make the property look like something from a magazine. The moving trucks arrived on a Tuesday morning, creating quite a spectacle in the quiet neighborhood. Professional movers in uniform shirts carried in furniture wrapped in protective blankets, artwork in custom crates, and boxes labeled with contents that spoke of a lifestyle my neighbors had never seen. Mrs. Henderson from across the street, who had known me since I was 5 years old, came over to introduce herself as if we had never met. "Are you the new owner? This is such a beautiful restoration. What kind of work do you do?" When I told her I was Marcus Johnson, and that I worked in technology consulting, her eyes widened. "Marcus, little Marcus from the Johnson family down on Oak Street. "My goodness, look how successful you've become," word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By afternoon, several neighbors had found excuses to walk by and see the new resident of the Victorian mansion. I made sure to be visible, directing the placement of furniture, signing for deliveries, and chatting warmly with anyone who stopped to say hello. That evening, as I was admiring my new home office with its view of the garden, my phone rang. It was Sarah, and she did not sound happy. "Marcus, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "I'm moving back home," I replied calmly. "Isn't that what families do, stay close to each other? Where did you get the money for that house?" "That's the Whitmore estate." "Do you have any idea what that place costs?" I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "I do know what it costs, Sarah. I paid cash for it yesterday." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, less confident, more concerned. "Marcus, if you've gotten involved in something illegal, everything I've done is completely legal and documented," I interrupted. "Would you like to see my tax returns, my investment statements? I'm happy to share them with the whole family." That night I saw my parents' car drive slowly past my house 3 times. The next morning both my mother and father called, suddenly interested in having a conversation about my situation. But I was busy, I told them. I had contractors coming to discuss some minor improvements to the property, and then I had a conference call with clients in California. For the first time in my adult life, I was the one who was too busy for family. Within a week of moving into the Victorian house, I began receiving visits from family members who had suddenly remembered my existence. The first was Jake, who showed up on a Saturday morning with coffee and donuts from the bakery where we used to go as kids. "Nice place," he said, looking around the living room with obvious amazement. "Mind if I ask how you afforded all this?" I invited him to sit on the Italian leather sofa that had cost more than his monthly salary, and pulled out my laptop. For the next hour, I walked him through my investment portfolio, explaining how I had identified undervalued tech companies and invested early. I showed him bank statements, tax documents, and investment reports that proved every dollar had been earned legitimately. Jake's face grew paler with each screen we reviewed. "Marcus, do you realize you're worth more than all of us combined?" "I wasn't trying to compete with anyone," I replied. "I was just trying to build a life for myself after being told I'd never be successful at anything." He had the grace to look ashamed when I reminded him of Sarah's words from the birthday dinner. She was upset that night. She meant every word, Jake. And so did Mom and Dad when they sat there and let her say it. My parents arrived that afternoon, clearly having coordinated their visit with Jake. My mother carried a casserole dish, as if bringing food would somehow normalize the situation. My father kept staring at the crown molding and original hardwood floors, calculating what the restoration must have cost. "We need to talk about this house," my father said without preamble. "What about it?" I asked, pouring coffee from my new espresso machine into cups that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. "Where did you really get this money?" my mother asked. "People don't just become millionaires working at computer companies." I spent the next 2 hours providing them with the same documentation I had shown Jake: investment statements, tax returns, bank records, and employment history that showed a clear progression from software tester to well-compensated consultant to successful investor. "This is legitimate," my father finally admitted. "But Marcus, this kind of money comes with responsibilities, family responsibilities." And there it was, less than a month after throwing me out of their house and telling me I'd never contributed anything to the family, they were now suggesting that my success came with obligations to support them. "What kind of responsibilities?" I asked. My mother jumped in quickly. "Well, your father's retirement fund took a hit in the market downturn, and Sarah's house purchase has stretched her finances thin. We're family, Marcus. Family takes care of each other." The irony was breathtaking. The same people who had excluded me from family gatherings and forgotten my birthday were now explaining to me how families should support each other. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Maria Santos, my real estate agent, accompanied by a reporter from the local newspaper. "Mr. Johnson, I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Maria said. "This is Jennifer Walsh from the Gazette. She's doing a story about young professionals who are revitalizing our historic downtown district. Your purchase has generated quite a bit of interest in the community." The interview lasted 30 minutes, during which I discussed my technology consulting business, my plans to hire local employees, and my commitment to preserving the historical character of the neighborhood. The photographer took pictures of me on the front porch in my home office and shaking hands with Maria. My parents sat silently through the entire interview, watching their unsuccessful middle child being treated like a local celebrity. When the reporter asked about my background, I mentioned growing up in the area and being excited to contribute to the community where I had learned the value of hard work. After the reporter left, my father looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't pride exactly, but it was respect. For the first time in my life, my father was looking at me as an equal. "Marcus," he said quietly, "we may have misjudged you." But I wasn't ready for reconciliation. Not yet. The wounds from that birthday dinner were still too fresh, and their sudden interest in my success felt opportunistic rather than genuine. "I need some time," I told them. "I'm still processing what happened at Sarah's celebration. Being told to get out of the family home and never come back isn't something you forget overnight." Over the next few weeks, I focused on building my consulting business and establishing myself in the community. I joined the Chamber of Commerce, volunteered at the local food bank, and began attending city council meetings. The more involved I became, the more invitations I received to neighborhood events and business functions. It felt good to be valued for my contributions rather than judged for my perceived failures. People in the community didn't care that I had struggled in high school or that I had never been the golden child. They cared about what I could offer now, today, as an adult who had built something meaningful. But my integration into the community came at a cost for my family. At every event I attended, people asked about the Johnsons on Oak Street. "Are you related to the family down the street? How wonderful that Marcus has done so well for himself." These conversations inevitably led to questions about why they hadn't mentioned having such a successful son and brother. Sarah, in particular, was struggling with the shift in dynamics. Her law practice was well respected locally, but technology consulting was seen as more cutting edge, more connected to the future. When people learned that the new owner of the Victorian mansion was a tech entrepreneur, their interest in the local lawyer diminished considerably. The situation reached a breaking point when the Chamber of Commerce invited me to speak at their monthly luncheon about opportunities in the technology sector. The same week, Sarah had planned to give a presentation about legal issues facing small businesses. My presentation was standing room only. Hers was attended by 12 people. 3 months after moving into the Victorian house, I received an unexpected visitor. Sarah arrived on a Thursday evening, alone, without the confidence and aggression she had displayed at the birthday dinner. She looked tired, and for the first time in years she looked vulnerable. "Can we talk?" she asked when I opened the door. I invited her into my living room, the same room where our parents had demanded to know about my family responsibilities weeks earlier. She sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching her purse like a shield. "The partnership at the firm isn't working out the way I expected," she began. "The legal market is more competitive than it used to be, and the senior partners are demanding longer hours for the same compensation. I'm working 80-hour weeks and barely breaking even after the partnership buy-in costs." I listened without interrupting, curious to see where this conversation was heading. "And the house," she continued. "Mom and Dad's house. The inspection turned up some serious issues. The roof needs replacement, the electrical system isn't up to code, and there's foundation work that needs to be done. The estimates are coming in at over $60,000, and that's on top of the purchase price." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Marcus, I can't afford it. I can't afford the house, and I can't afford the repairs. My credit is maxed out from the partnership investment, and the bank won't extend my mortgage for the additional renovation costs." The golden child was asking the family disappointment for help. The irony was almost too perfect. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" "I want to apologize," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I said at the dinner party was cruel and unfair. You didn't deserve that, and I've regretted it every day since then. It was a start, but I needed more than regret." "Why did you say it?" I asked. "What made you so angry that you would humiliate me in front of a room full of people?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, more honest than I had ever heard it. "Because I was scared," she admitted. "You disappeared to Seattle, and we didn't hear much from you. But then you showed up looking successful and confident, and I realized I didn't know who you were anymore. The brother I remembered was the one who struggled in school, who worked odd jobs, who never quite fit in. But that wasn't who walked into the house that night." She looked around my living room, taking in the artwork and furniture that spoke of a lifestyle she was struggling to maintain. "I worked so hard to be the successful one," she continued. "Everything I did was about proving I was worthy of being the golden child. But you just quietly built something bigger than anything I ever achieved, and you did it without needing anyone's approval or recognition." It was the most honest conversation we had ever had, but I wasn't ready to forgive and forget. "Sarah, do you have any idea what it was like growing up in your shadow? Do you know what it feels like to have your own parents treat you like a consolation prize?" "I know now," she said quietly, "because that's how I feel every time someone in town asks me about my successful brother. Every time someone mentions your business or your house or your community involvement, I remember that I'm not the family success story anymore." Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was my mother, and she sounded panicked. "Marcus, you need to come to the hospital. Your father had a heart attack." The emergency room at Regional Medical Center was a place I hadn't been since Jake broke his arm playing football in 8th grade. My father was in stable condition, but the doctor explained that he had suffered what they called a warning heart attack. Not life-threatening, but a clear indication that his cardiovascular health needed immediate attention. My mother was a wreck, and Jake had driven down from Columbus as soon as he got the call. Sarah and I arrived together, our difficult conversation forgotten in the face of family crisis. Whatever our differences, we were still siblings when it mattered. The next few days were a blur of medical consultations, insurance paperwork, and difficult conversations about lifestyle changes. My father would need cardiac medication, dietary modifications, and regular monitoring. More importantly, the stress of financial worries wasn't helping his recovery. That's when I learned the full extent of my parents' situation. My father's retirement investments had lost significant value in recent market downturns. My mother's part-time job at the library didn't offer health insurance benefits. The Florida retirement they had been planning was financially impossible, and now they had medical expenses that would strain their budget even further. "We might have to sell the house," my mother confided during one of our hospital visits. "Even if Sarah can't buy it, we need the equity to cover your father's medical bills and have something for retirement." But selling the house came with its own problems. The inspection issues Sarah had mentioned were just the beginning. The property needed significant work to meet current market standards, work that would cost more than my parents could afford to invest. Jake was dealing with his own financial pressures. Teaching and coaching provided emotional rewards, but the salary barely covered his family's basic expenses. He couldn't contribute significantly to our parents' medical costs or help with the house repairs. Sarah's law practice was struggling more than she had admitted. The partnership buy-in had depleted her savings, and her caseload wasn't generating the income she had projected. She was working longer hours for less money, and the stress was showing. I found myself in a position I had never expected to be in. I was the only family member with the financial resources to help, but I was also the one who had been rejected and humiliated by the very people who now needed my assistance. The moral complexity wasn't lost on me. Part of me wanted to remind them of Sarah's cruel words, of my parents' silent acceptance of my banishment, of years of feeling like the family disappointment. But another part of me, the part that had been raised by these imperfect people, couldn't watch them struggle when I had the means to help. During my father's second night in the hospital, I made a decision that would define the next chapter of our family story. I pulled Sarah aside in the hospital cafeteria, away from my mother's anxious hovering and Jake's worried pacing. "I'll help with Dad's medical expenses," I told her, "and I'll help with the house repairs. But there are conditions." She nodded, understanding that this wasn't charity but a negotiation. "First, we're going to have a family meeting where everyone acknowledges what happened at your celebration dinner. Not just you, but Mom and Dad too. They sat there and watched their son get humiliated, and that needs to be addressed." "Okay," she agreed. "Second, I'm not just writing checks and disappearing. If I'm going to invest in this family, then I want to be treated like an equal member of it. No more forgotten birthdays, no more excluded celebrations, no more treating me like the family's consolation prize. That's fair," she said. "And third, this isn't a bailout. It's a loan. I'll structure it in a way that doesn't create financial hardship, but everyone needs to understand that my success doesn't make me the family's personal ATM." That weekend, we held the most difficult family meeting of our lives. Sitting around my parents' kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten thousands of meals together, we finally had the conversations that should have happened years earlier. My parents apologized for their favoritism, acknowledging that they had failed to recognize my strengths while focusing on my struggles. Jake apologized for his silence during the birthday dinner, admitting that he had been too much of a coward to stand up for his brother when it mattered. Sarah's apology was the most comprehensive. She took full responsibility for her cruelty, explaining her insecurities and jealousy without using them as excuses for her behavior. She also revealed the extent of her financial struggles, making it clear that her golden child status had been more fragile than any of us had realized. But the most important part of the meeting wasn't the apologies. It was the establishment of new family dynamics based on mutual respect rather than old patterns of favoritism and resentment. We set up regular family dinners, shared holiday responsibilities, and created systems for communication that included everyone equally. I established a family assistance fund, structured as low-interest loans rather than gifts, that could help with emergencies while maintaining everyone's dignity. My father's medical expenses were covered, the house repairs were funded, and Sarah's partnership financial pressures were eased. But more importantly, I was finally accepted as an equal member of the family I had been born into but never fully belonged to. 6 months after my father's heart attack, our family had found a new equilibrium that none of us could have imagined during that terrible birthday dinner. The changes weren't just financial. They were fundamental shifts in how we related to each other as adults, rather than falling back into childhood roles. My technology consulting business had grown beyond my expectations. Working from the Victorian house, I had hired 3 local employees and established partnerships with 2 other consulting firms in Columbus and Cincinnati. The business was providing well-paying jobs in our community while allowing me to work with clients across the country. The success hadn't gone unnoticed. The Chamber of Commerce had elected me to their board of directors, and I had been appointed to the city's Economic Development Committee. When people talked about the future of our town, my name came up regularly as someone who was bringing new opportunities to the area. More importantly, I had started a scholarship fund for students with learning disabilities, providing financial assistance and mentoring for kids who struggled academically but showed potential in other areas. The fund was my way of ensuring that future generations wouldn't have to choose between their family's approval and their own path to success. Sarah's law practice had stabilized once her financial pressures eased. She had shifted her focus from trying to compete with larger firms to specializing in family law and estate planning, areas where her personal experience with family dynamics proved valuable. She was earning less than she had projected as a partner, but she was working reasonable hours and finding genuine satisfaction in helping families navigate difficult transitions. My parents had made the lifestyle changes their doctor recommended, and my father's health had improved significantly. Instead of the Florida retirement they had originally planned, they decided to stay in Ohio near their children and grandchildren. The house repairs had been completed, and they were comfortable in their home without the financial stress that had contributed to my father's health scare. Jake had been promoted to athletic director at his school, a position that came with increased responsibility and better compensation. He had also started coaching summer camps that I helped him market through my business network, creating additional income while doing work he loved. But the most significant change was in our family relationships. We celebrated birthdays together now, all of them, with equal attention and genuine joy. Holiday gatherings included everyone's achievements and challenges without the competitive atmosphere that had poisoned previous celebrations. Last month, we celebrated the first anniversary of my move back to Ohio with a family dinner at the Victorian house. As we sat around my dining room table sharing stories and laughing together, my mother made an observation that captured how much had changed. "You know," she said, "I spent so many years worried about whether you kids would be successful that I forgot to pay attention to whether you were happy. Marcus, you seem happier now than you've ever been. And I think it's not just because of the money." She was right. The financial success was gratifying, but the real victory was being accepted for who I had become, rather than judged for who I had been. I had proven that the family disappointment could build something meaningful, but more importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't dependent on their approval. The scholarship fund had awarded its first grants to 5 students, including a young man whose dyslexia reminded me of my own struggles. When I met with him to discuss his college plans, I saw the same uncertainty I had felt at his age, the same worry that his learning differences would limit his opportunities. "The thing about having a brain that works differently," I told him, is that you see solutions other people miss. Your dyslexia isn't a disability, it's a different way of processing information. The world needs people who think differently. 6 months later, he sent me a letter from his first semester at Ohio State, where he was studying computer science and already showing the kind of innovative thinking that had helped me succeed in the tech industry. My relationship with Sarah had evolved into something resembling friendship. We met for coffee regularly, not to discuss family business but to share our professional challenges and personal goals. She had started dating someone new, a fellow lawyer who appreciated her intelligence without feeling threatened by her success. "I owe you an apology I can never fully repay," she told me during one of our coffee meetings. "But I also owe you thanks for showing me what real success looks like. It's not about being better than your siblings. It's about building something meaningful." The Victorian house had become more than just my residence. It was a symbol of transformation for our entire family. Neighbors who remembered the awkward kid who struggled in school now saw a successful businessman who employed local people and contributed to community development. But the real transformation was internal. I had spent most of my life trying to prove I belonged in a family that seemed to have no place for me. Now I understood that belonging isn't something you earn through achievements or lose through failures. It's something you create through mutual respect, honest communication, and the willingness to see each other as complete human beings rather than collections of successes and disappointments. The journey from that terrible birthday dinner to this new family dynamic hadn't been easy. It required confronting years of resentment, acknowledging painful truths, and rebuilding relationships from the ground up. But it also taught me that families, like individuals, can change and grow if everyone commits to doing the difficult work of healing. As I write this story, I'm sitting in the home office of the Victorian house, looking out at the garden that blooms more beautifully each year. Tomorrow we're having Sunday dinner at my parents' house, a tradition we've maintained every week for the past 6 months. Sarah will bring her boyfriend, Jake will drive down from Columbus with his family, and we'll spend the afternoon together as equals. Sometimes being pushed out is exactly what you need to discover who you really are. My family's rejection forced me to build my own life, to find my own definition of success, and to develop the confidence that comes from proving you can stand on your own. When I finally returned to the family, I came back as a whole person rather than someone seeking their approval. The middle child who was told he'd never amount to anything became the one who lifted everyone up. The family disappointment became the family's foundation, and the young man who was kicked out on his birthday became the one who taught his family what unconditional love really means. That's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on, and sometimes the structure you create is stronger and more beautiful than anything you could have imagined when you were still trying to fit into someone else's blueprint for your life. What started as the worst birthday of my life became the catalyst for the best chapter of my family's story. And every time I walk through the front door of the Victorian house, I'm reminded that home isn't just a place you come from. Sometimes it's a place you have to create for yourself before you can share it with the people you love. I hope my story inspires you to remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition or approval. Whether you're dealing with family rejection, professional setbacks, or just the everyday challenge of believing in yourself, know that your current situation isn't your final destination. Have you experienced family betrayal or felt like the overlooked sibling in your own family? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity and finding your own path to success. And remember to share this story with someone who might need to hear that being different doesn't mean being less than. Sometimes the family member who doesn't fit the mold is exactly the one who can reshape it into something better. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to build the life you deserve, regardless of who believes in you along the way.